How do finances make or break a relationship?
Did you ask me that before?
I think we did, yeah.
Do you want to see if I change my answer?
No.
We do that in my profession sometimes.
Really? It's just, I think...
Police do that too, you know?
Yeah.
That's the same question more than once.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know. Interrogate.
Are we on?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I mean, it doesn't matter because
Yeah, I got you.
we added this however we need to be.
Well, that's an interesting question. And some backstory to answering it. It's rare to find a woman, for instance, who would say she was dating someone because they were financially well fixed. You would normally get they're married or I'm dating him because I love him. There seems to be that kind of mentality and that kind of maybe confusion about what makes for a good relationship. But there's an old kind of funny cliche: no money, no fun. And I think to a certain extent, while love is not actually a fool to money, love can in fact be a tough road. Traveling the road of love can be really tough if you don't have money, because from a strictly psychological point of view, a guy by the name of Abraham Maslow developed a hierarchy, a step ladder of needs, and he placed the need for love somewhere on there. Maybe let's say step 5. But down at step 2 and 3, he placed basic things like having food on your table. So to some extent, the fundamental needs, the basic needs that we have, the needs for things like food and clothing, housing, have to be in place before we're able to express the higher, more ethereal needs like love. So that's a straight psychological answer. As I was alluding at the beginning, a poetic answer is that it doesn't matter. Money doesn't matter. If I love you, rich or poor, doesn't matter. Doesn't make any difference. But what I have found over the years is that a lot of people that come to see me as clients who are having financial difficulties are also having difficulties in their personal relationship. Their love is, it's difficult to gauge where their love is because it's covered over by so many other things that they need. So instead of coming into my office talking about how much they love each other, they talk about money that was spent, that may have been spent doing something else. You know, you spent money going to the Redskins game, as opposed to buying food for the house or paying the rent or paying the mortgage. So even though the love may be there, it gets overshadowed by the money situation. So I think it has a profound influence in reality. Poetically, we say it doesn't really have an effect, doesn't really have an influence.
Thank you. All right, number 2. Okay. As time progresses in a marriage or relationship, oftentimes couples complain about a lack of sex. It usually being one person as opposed to both. So what's your advice you can give the couples in that situation?
Well, I think bottom line is, again, sex is on that hierarchy too, Maslow's hierarchy. We like to think, again, somewhat poetically, that physical sex is a more basic need or behavior. Romantic sex, that's a higher level, comes closer to human. Animals engage in physical sex. Humans engage in the more romantic, lovemaking kind of sex. And Maslow actually identifies a couple of levels. The level of the basic sex drive, which he puts down there with the need to eat, the need to be safe, the need to drink for some type of shelter. And then the actual love as more of an expression of something within us for another person. He places at a slightly higher level. And, poetically, I love you more than life itself. Our love will transcend time, that type of thing. What seems to happen is that I think people play out, in a sense, the hand that they're dealt. Some people are apparently more physically sexually predisposed than other people. There are people who just seemingly do not have a strong drive towards physical sexuality. This is something I've learned over the years. I remember 25, 30 years ago working with a woman who was married. And one of the questions that you ask when you're ruling out depression is related to a person's sexual activity. So I asked her about her sexual activity. And the frequency, and she said, well, we may have sex once a month. And I found that surprising. I said, once a month, is that okay with you and your husband? She said, yeah, that's fine, that's fine.
But was he fine with it? Do you know? Was he fine with that? Do you know? Like
yes.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, he was fine with that too. Now, he wasn't there when I initially brought up the subject, but later on, he indicated that he was fine with it too. However, the turnaround on that is that I had the occasion to talk with the wife about 15 years later, after she and the husband at that time had divorced. And she came to see me about another matter. She wasn't having trouble in the second marriage. But she came to talk to me about another matter. And actually it had to do with getting some of the records from the previous marriage and that situation. And in the course of doing that, which was a pretty benign thing, she said, hey, do you have some of the records from the... I said, yeah, and I was working on collecting them for her. And she said, oh, by the way, you remember years ago you asked me a question about frequency of sex and whether or not that was important? Mm-hmm. I said, yeah. She said, well, the answer I gave you. I said, yeah. She said, that wasn't true. I remarried and I'm now aware that I definitely need to have sex. Physically, I'm predisposed to having sex more than once a month. But apparently, and we didn't talk about that any further because it was not really appropriate, but she felt a need, I guess, because I had asked a question and she had answered it, and then apparently in her second marriage things had changed for her. And somehow that question stuck with her. And she felt a need, I guess, to give me the new information. So you put her, let's say, with person A, and they develop a pattern, a ritual. Couples do this. You put her with person B, and whatever that situation with person B entails, and they develop a different pattern, a different ritual around which they function. The one person, person A, might be in an occupation or have personal interests that might, for whatever reason or another, lessen his libidinal drive, his predisposition for sexuality, or opportunity to be around her. And I think that was the case there. And a large part of wanting to be sexually active is a kind of ritual that goes on in your house. If, and I'm going to talk heterosexually here, if the woman or the man in the marriage or the relationship is sort of provocative, sexually provocative, or carries herself in a certain way, or he carries himself in a certain way, it predisposes you to getting into that ritual, you know. I think I like to say that foreplay is always going on. It's not just going on 5 minutes before you decide to actually get together physically. Foreplay is in the dressing that maybe the woman does to leave the house, you know. And the man sees her leave, he leaves. He's carrying this image all day. Wow, she really looked nice, you know. Wow, she looked great. She looked like a new, I didn't notice it last night, but it looks like a new hairdo. New shade of lipstick, looks good, hey, you know. So he's thinking about that, and he might call during the day and go something like, hey, you looked really nice today. It brightens up maybe her morning, but also gets her in a certain frame of mind. She has to snap back to get into the work frame of mind, but by the time they get back home, they're kind of maybe ready to see each other because they've had this opportunity to do this little, another word I like to use is a dance. They've had a chance to do this little dance with each other over the course of the day, which kind of puts each other in a certain frame of mind. You could change that scenario and no contact, no complimentary expressions, no attempt to look appealing or to look nice, and that reflects on how people interact with each other. Work taking precedent. So then you get into a habit of not having sex, or making sex the last thing you do at night, you know, or having sex with you, your spouse, and Jay Leno. You know, that type of thing, or having sex during the commercials when you're watching ESPN. Certainly those things are going to have an effect. But just by and large, person A and person B are not going to be the same or carry the same predisposition for sex throughout their lives. Everyone has a different beat. There's a different drummer that they cater to. My experience has been that people who tend to come out of the blocks fast and early tend to lose interest maybe a little quicker. And I mean, I'm talking like 50s, 60s. I'm not talking about losing interest in their 30s or whatever. But there also is a lot of research looking at the geriatric population, which is a very large percentage of our population. And it speaks to resurrection of sexual drive in the 70s or in the 80s, and young people who are in nursing homes and situations like that where elderly people are around each other. They find that there tends to be some resurrection of sexuality in whatever forms, I don't know, but there are still people who are in the 80s who are presumably being sexual at that level. So I don't think it necessarily has to die out. I think it's pretty much an individual matter, with people. So I guess I wouldn't agree. I wouldn't agree with the statement that a marriage is doomed to have their sexual interest or activities just go on some kind of a downward decline. And we live in a marvelous age of miracles. Men coming into their 50s, 60s, and 70s now have Cialis and see anybody. If you have Cialis, you can see Joan or see Barbara or see Mary. Viagra, and somebody said, well, I know she's an attractive woman, but Viagra's supposed to make you go blind. And so the guy said, well, I think I'll chance one eye. I'll just take half a pill. I made that up.
What constitutes a strong, long-lasting relationship?
Selfishness, in a nutshell. Selfishness. Having your own life. Each of you having your own life and being vivacious in your own life and being somebody interesting that the other person wants to be around. The woman should be a kick that you can't imagine being without this lady, man. She's just vibrant, and she's into her stuff. You're into your stuff, and she's going, wow, what is this guy going to do next? It's that kind of thing. It's a day-to-day, each day being the rest of your life. Not selfishness in the sense of egocentric, where you don't really give a doggone about the other person, but selfishness in the sense that you focus on making yourself the best that you can be in terms of your appearance, in terms of, I notice that people, they'll do some things cosmetically. Like most people, if they lose their teeth for one reason or another, will replace their teeth. Now, I have met some purists who, I asked one guy, I said, why have you decided you don't want to put those two front teeth back in? Dentists are pretty good at that. I just want to be natural. I said, well, okay. Well, that's how he feels. And maybe that works in his relationship. But I think it's real important to take advantage of cosmetic possibilities if you're comfortable with it. If you're not, then okay. But some men like being bald-headed. Some men cut their hair off. All I can say is thank God for wigs and implants, because if I should lose my hair, I'm going to probably go into assorted wigs, one for every day of the week, something like that, unless I find it makes you look like a clown. But I'm not just going to accept that I have to be bald-headed if I think that that's not becoming to me. If I think it is, then fine. And I'm not going to be adentitious because that's natural any more than I'm going to avoid using deodorant because it's natural body odor. You work at keeping your body in shape, exercise, whatever. Cosmetic things. I believe that when you love yourself, it's easier for other people to love you. It says a lot about a person when you talk with them and they're putting themselves down. Oh, you know, I need to lose about 60 pounds. Oh, well, you know, my hair is always messed up. Oh, well, you know, and you go out, you wonder to yourself, well, why am I out with this person? They've given me this checklist of things that they see that are wrong with themselves, and I'm being a little facetious with that. So I think it becomes important to make yourself or see yourself as someone worthy of loving, of being around, making yourself interesting. And I borrowed that term selfishness from Ayn Rand. It's a concept she uses in her philosophy. She says the art of selfishness. And I'm not talking about you wanting all the pie, you wanting all this. I'm talking about a rational self-interest that then makes other people interested in you. And I think that can sustain a relationship as well as attract people to you at whatever point in your life. You know, John Derrick was 70 and Bo Derek was, 25? And, you know, you figure all these guys in Hollywood, why would she gravitate to him? It makes you go, that's what Arsenio Hall says, it makes you go,
Can you explain, I think we asked you this before, we're going to ask it again, can you explain why men seem to be afraid of commitment or afraid of being in a monogamous relationship?
I think some of the problem that men have to deal with is kind of, I don't want to say genetic or DNA or encoded, but it's kind of in that direction. Men have, over the years, I think had different duties, different responsibilities in relationships. And to that end, their commitment has been double-edged. They've had to be committed in the home, but they've also been outside of the home. Now, I find as you go through different socioeconomic levels, you can get different kinds of attitudes and monogamous behavior senses out of men. Now, some people would disagree with this, but I feel that lower socioeconomic people tend to be more monogamous in many ways because they don't have the money, the opportunity, the variety of opportunities. I think people 3, 4, 5 decades ago, in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s and the 20s, tended to be a little more monogamous. Why? Because transportation, the ability to be places, wasn't as available as it is now. Yeah? You can be in New York in 2 hours, and you've gone from the whatever the ratio of men to women is here in D.C., you've gone to New York where you got like 10 million people right there in the Bronx, or I mean in the Manhattan, Bronx, whatever area. That's a lot of people to choose from. And men didn't have that type of choice internationally. The world is smaller, more opportunities to meet people, to hang out with people. So I think all of those things have gone into maybe middle class and upper middle class, wealthy people having more opportunities to be available. I do think that there are biological predispositions that men have to overcome. Women tend to, I think, be fighting in the opposite direction now. I honestly believe that it is more in the nature of a female in terms of the human species, what we call ontogeny, the human species, to be more monogamous. I was reading something the other day that when it became necessary for women to carry their young and to have to use one or both arms to hold that young, they became more dependent on a mate or someone to help them. The female ape carrying her young can grasp her with the big toe and the other toes, just as they can grasp her with the hands. The feet and the hands both can grab. I forget the magazine, but this was over this new discovery they made over in Ethiopia about this child they found kind of ape-like, but they had found that her feet were more like modern people's feet without the big toe in opposition. And he went on to describe that that whole thing that I just said. The woman needing then somebody to help her because she's now got to pay more attention to caring for the child proved to be a problem. Today, women have jobs, they have incomes, they have retirement benefits, they have unemployment if they're not working, they have savings if they're not working. There's less of that kind of a need. So women are able now to maybe be a little less monogamous. But on the psychological side, I still think that women tend to be inclined a little bit more towards monogamy than men. I think that has a biological, anthropological component to it. And I would suspect that as you go from culture to culture, you'll find a similar pattern that women tend to nest more, be a little more inclined towards monogamy. Obviously, a woman doesn't have to. She can do things that she wants to do as well. But I just think her inclination, psychological inclination, sociological inclination, is more towards monogamy. A man tends to be more gregarious and out around. I don't think necessarily looking for other women, but just tends to be more out there. And a lot of times in the process of being out there, that's what you encounter. So when I'm doing couples counseling, one of the things that I strongly advocate is if you don't have anything to do out there, go home. Because one of the quickest ways to get into some type of liaison out there is to just be available and become aware of what opportunities are available out there. Yeah.
One last question, this will be it. Thoughts that create a good, solid foundation are, and if you could fill in the blank with that.
Thoughts?
Mm-hmm. In your opinion.
Well, following what I've been saying today, I really do believe we have to develop a rational self-interest in ourselves to try to be what we can be. I feel like the Nike commercial, be all that we can be. It's real important to be involved with self-discovery. I personally think people who are into self-discovery are very interesting people, provocative people, good people to talk about, talk to, be around. So I would say that's really, really important. There are a lot of things you can do to accomplish that. We talk about centering yourself. We talk about developing interests in politics or in world affairs or getting into interesting careers. There are a lot of ways you can do that. But I think it's real important to work on yourself. I believe very strongly in some type of spirituality, some type of spiritual grounding. I think people who without a spiritual grounding are depressed. I mean, I'm making a blanket statement. I remember one time I made a blanket statement that Catholics were depressed. And I was booed off of was booed off of a stage because there were a lot of Catholics there. And what I said was, if I'm interviewing a person, they come to my office and I'm interviewing them, and they said, well, I feel a little depressed, Doc. I said, okay. And then my next question would be, are you Catholic? Because at that time, anyway, Catholics had so many don'ts in their religion that you could sin simply by getting up. Do anything other than get up in the morning. Well, I think, of course, the priests and the popes over the years have looked at that since the 50s and the 60s and have done a lot of things. For instance, somewhere around the 60s, the Catholic Church came out with a statement that a little libation, a little wine, can actually lift the spirits, and therefore can be a positive thing, And it was great that I think that they did that, because it brought them more in step with what people were doing. But before that, a drink, oh my God. But then you still have people who think, a drink, oh my God. So when the Catholic Church came up with that, the fact that you cannot use birth control, you got 18 children, but you can't use birth control. There's a place where we have to put the realities and whatever the church is saying in the same ballpark. And I think the churches are making steps in that direction. But I don't mean so much church religion as I mean spirituality. When I say spirituality, that's what I mean. We are physical, we know that. We are less sure about our psychological selves. But we are psychological, meaning that our physical self acts according to some predictability. There is predictability to what we do. Now, we try to relate it to the moon. We try to relate it to the star configurations, We refer, for instance, to a woman's cycle, menstrual cycle, in terms that go along with the cycle of the moon. So we have often thought that we were like other things in the universe. We are part of that whole universe. Okay, maybe we are, maybe we're not. But we have to gear who we are, not just in that broad sense, but also who we are as individuals. And I think spirituality brings that third dimension. So we have our physical selves, we have our psychological selves, how we behave. Some of it we can explain, some of it we cannot. And then there's a spiritual side of us. And without that side of us, call it what you want, but without that spiritual side of us, we can be lost. The death of a loved one. It can knock you to your knees. Wait, where does your loved one go when they die? Do they just go in that hole? Are they just burned up as in cremation and just become ashes that you throw and then they're nothing? It's the basic question that we grapple with. If you go back to Jean-Paul Sartre's Being and Nothingness, which was a revolutionary concept way back then when he wrote this book. We face that. Are we nothing? Are we a person asleep, dreaming that this is happening? Or are we a person who is awake, who's doing this? What is life? Is life the dream, or is the dream life? Those are the kinds of questions that I think your philosophy and your spirituality can help you grapple with. Is it you, or is there more? Do we go to another level when we die? Do we go to heaven when we die? You say, why is that relevant? It's relevant because I get people in my office who are grappling with that, the thought of death is frightening to them, even when they're not sick.